My friend, Sarah, was in a nightclub and drunk off her face, and she got an overwhelming urge to tell a total stranger that her leg hurts. It didn't. All a bit strange, she ignores it but it doesn't stop, so she walks up to this guy and says, "I know this is crazy but I've got a huge urge to tell you my leg hurts." I know that's crazy. Again, sorry. But, he bursts into tears. Turns out his dad had just died and they made a pact before that if there was an afterlife he would get a message to him saying a totally random phrase. So there could be no mistakes, they decided the phrase was, "I've hurt my leg." My mother and I got off the interstate on our way to Portland, up from Sacramento. Suddenly, there's 5 feet of snow everywhere. We saw a McDonald's. When we went inside, there were courtesy phones everywhere. I mean, there was an entire counter lined up with phones. We'd never seen that. Our fries were hot, fresh and delicious. Mom said we should get back on the road before it started snowing again, so we did. We got back to the interstate. Suddenly it was dry roads, no snow, and clear skies. On our way home, we decided we wanted to stop there again but there was no exit, no town, and no McDonald's. We made that trip a half a dozen times after that and never could locate it again. She and I agreed we'd found an alternate dimension. About 3 years ago, me and my friend were working together on a project at a college campus that we both work at regularly. We were in the library when I got called over to another building. When I got to the other building I realized that I left my keys in the library and texted Dana to please grab them for me when he was done in the library. He said okay. About an hour later, Dana walks into the room that I'm in. I reach into my pocket and my keys were in my pocket. I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I guess I had my keys all along." He looked stunned and said, "No, I have your keys." He reached into his pocket and he didn't have them. I've never understood what happened there.
A few years ago, I lost a necklace and tore my house up looking for it. I finally gave up and, about 6 months later, I found it under my pillow one morning. It was like the tooth fairy had left it for me. I had washed the sheets many times since losing the necklace, and it was a heavy pendant, so it was not something that would easily go unnoticed in the wash. I still have no idea how it ended up there.
I was at a friend's house and they were in the garage, working on a dirt bike. The driveway was empty and their parents had left a while ago. I went inside to grab a soda, but decided to look for his cat, who I hadn't seen all day. I walked into the office and, as I'm calling the cat's name, a deep man's voice said, "Meow," right into my right ear. I jumped and ran around the main floor looking for who said it. I didn't find anyone. When I was 12 years old, I went up to Lake Tahoe with my friend and his parents who had a condo in Incline Village. One day, the two of us are walking to the bowling alley and had to cross a street at a crosswalk. Right after we stepped off the curb, a car came really close to hitting us. All of a sudden, we're both up on the curb, like we were lifted a few feet. We both looked at each other strangely. "Did you jump?" "No, did you?" "No." We spent the next hour kind of dumbfounded. It didn't feel like a shove or any use of force. We were in the street, then we weren't. When I was in elementary school, I used to have the same dream every weekend starting on Saturday, when I would go to sleep, and then waking up in the middle of the night, on Sunday morning, and throwing up. The dream was always a bunch of numbers. Not even anything happening, just a bunch of random, jumbled up numbers all over the place. I never understood why that happened. The same dream would happen on the same night every week, and I would throw up every single time. I always think about it and wonder what it meant, or if it was just some weird coincidence. I was changing my pants in my bedroom before work and I took off my belt. After putting on my other pair of pants, I went to put my belt back on, but the belt was gone. No one else was in the room and I spent a good 10 minutes looking for it. I had simply set it on the floor. It's been 10 years and I've never seen that belt again.
I remember being pretty young, like 9 or 10, and I was at the car park of a pub in England. I remember seeing someone in their teens in the window of a house looking over the car park. They waved at me and I felt like I knew them somehow. My parents asked who I was waving at and I said just some lady in the window over there. Didn't think much of it. Fast forward 10 years. I was at my Nana's new house. I remember walking into her room and going to the window. I then realized that I was in the house looking over that same parking lot and remembering that interaction from years before. Then a girl around 9 or 10, who was in the car park, waved at me and I waved back. I felt like I knew her. I could not explain it and have never told anyone about it. It freaked me out. My 4-year-old put down her fork at dinner and turned around to look behind her, then turned forward and said, "Candace is here. We don't know anyone named Candace." This still baffles me, but when I was a kid, we moved into a new house, and, while the realtor was showing us around, I saw a lady sitting at a white dresser in a pink room. She even waved at me. When I asked my mom who it was, she just brushed me off because she was trying to listen to the realtor. The weirdest part of this was that, once we moved in, we found that there were no rooms painted pink in the house. My family just brushed the whole thing off, despite my being adamant of what I saw. Anyway, fast forward a few years, I'm in high school at this point, and we start renovating the house. While stripping the wallpaper in the master bedroom, we found out it was painted pink. Early one morning, my mother was driving me and my siblings to high school. It was daylight savings, thus still dark out, so there was barely anyone around. While stopped at a red light, right before the light turned green, I watched as a very bright, very see-through man ran in front of the car. I gasped but didn't say anything until my mother whispered, "Did you see him, too?"
This one is strange to me because it was so long ago that I'm convinced I have to be remembering things wrong. I was a young kid and, at the grocery store, I saw this small toy helicopter that I really wanted for some reason. I, of course, didn't buy it, but the memory of it was stuck in my head. A few nights later, I had a dream that I was playing with the helicopter, but I realized it was a dream. In the dream, stupid young me thought that, if I put it under my pillow, it would still be there when I woke up. After that, I woke up and eagerly checked under the pillow. It was right where I left it in the dream. As a kid, I wasn't surprised to find it there, but years later I still have no clue how the toy helicopter actually got underneath the pillow.
I turned to a person who I barely knew and said, "My sister is getting engaged right now," without having the intent of speaking to them at all. He politely asked me why I said that and I had to just shake my head and say, "I don't know." A few days later I found out that, sure enough, at that exact moment on the far side of the world, my sister had said yes to Mr. Right. I hadn't even known she was dating.
I was driving across the US and drove into Salt Lake City. For whatever reason, I got a craving for IHOP, so I punched it into Google Maps and followed the directions to a spot in the middle of town. I walked in, and the place was empty. I don't mean, like, there were no customers. I mean there was literally not a person in the place. No wait staff, no customers, no cooks. Nobody. There was partially eaten food on all the tables, and bags and purses in the booths. TVs were on everywhere. There were even burgers on the grill slowly burning. There wasn't a soul in the place. It was like they all just vanished at once. I was so freaked out that I hopped in my car and drove until I hit the Nevada border before stopping to eat. I still have no idea what the fuck happened.
One time, my mom called me to let me know it was time for us to head somewhere. I walked out of my room and saw her out of the corner of my eye, walking into her room. I followed her, calling her name, and once again caught a glimpse of her, this time walking into her bathroom. I walked into the bathroom and no one was there. My blood ran cold. I called out to my mom and she had been downstairs the whole time.
I was driving to work one morning and a school bus suddenly overtook another parked bus and came straight for me with no possibility of stopping in time. I was terrified and closed my eyes expecting it to hit my car, but when I opened them again I was about half a mile up the road. There was no possible way that the bus could have managed to stop in time before hitting me. To this day I still cannot explain what happened and how I ended up further up the road.
My dad owned a small garden shop, so I'd stay behind the checkout after school until the shop closed. That was until I saw a tall man wearing all black, like a trench coat, walking past my dad and smiling at me before going into a staff-only area. I jumped up to stop him, even though I was only 7. This back area was filled with new shipments. I turned the corner, but nobody is there. There was nowhere he could have gone. I asked my dad to check the CCTV after closing, but it's only shown me jumping up and running out of frame. I never felt comfortable there again.
I used to fence. I was at a tournament once and had just started a bout against a competitor. You win the bout by being the first to 5 points. I score what I believe to be first point, but the official indicates the match is over and I've won. I stood there, confused for a second, but my opponent seems to agree that I've won, salutes, approaches for a handshake. I go along with it. I check the scorecard and it says I've won 5-2. In total, I lost probably 4 or 5 minutes of time. It hasn't happened to me since, to the best of my knowledge, but it's been 20 years and I still wonder what happened.
My grandmother was very sick and dying. For a few weeks leading up to her death, she would stare off into space and talk to dead relatives. She'd say things like, "I'll see you soon, Alice," or "I'm coming soon, Mabel." She would always name previously deceased relatives. Then, one day, she started talking to her brother, Henry. We thought it was weird because Henry was still alive. We got a call the next day that Henry had died the previous day.
I was about 17 and learning to drive. Mom and I had just been to the grocery store and were running a few errands. It was almost dark and we were heading home. We were first in line at a left-turn stoplight at a large intersection. The turn arrow light turned green and I just sat there. It was a very odd sensation. I knew the light was green and that I needed to pull through but I couldn't. It was like all motivation to move was gone. Almost like when you're staring off into space, but I was fully conscious that the light had changed and turning was what I was supposed to be doing. Mom didn't say a word either, just stared at the light. About 5 seconds later, a full-sized Suburban came barreling through the red light. The speed limit on the road was 45, but he had to have been doing 65 miles per hour. The car shook hard when he passed us. After he ran the light, I turned like normal and Mom and I both kind of woke up. Afterward, we both described the same feeling coming over us at the light. If we hadn't both been tranced out, or what have you, the Suburban would have struck us broadside. A Suburban versus a Saturn at 60 miles per hour wouldn't have been pretty. Mom would have probably been killed on impact, and I highly doubt I would have survived as well. Getting ready for work one early morning, I was putting on my shoes when I heard a bark behind me from the other side of my living room. I saw my mom's dog. I called him over and he sat between my feet while I petted him. Then, he just wasn't there. I live in BC, he lived in Ontario. My mom had him put down that morning. He came to say goodbye. I was eating lunch at Wendy's and Bill Murray sat down at my table, stole a fry, dipped it into my Frosty, and ate it. He then looked at me and said, "Nobody's gonna believe you," and walked away.
I have a habit of reading before bed. One night, I finished reading, set my book on the nightstand, and put my glasses on top like I always do. The next morning, the glasses were gone. I knew I'd had them because my vision is too bad to read without them. At the time, I didn't have a backup pair, so the next day my parents came and helped me look all over my apartment, but they were gone. So, they took me to get a new pair. Months later, I went through the same nighttime routine, and when I woke up in the morning, both pairs of glasses were sitting on top of the book I'd been reading. I had a ring my mother gave me many years ago. A few years after she died, I had lost it. I looked everywhere, I was so upset. I finally said, "Please help me, Mom, I can't bear to lose this." I had dumped out my jewelry box 4 times already, but I decided to open it one more time. The ring was sitting on top. My great-grandmother was in the hospital and died. Because my great-grandfather was elderly, and it was 2 a.m., the hospital rang their daughter, my grandmother, to go and break the news to my great-grandfather. So, at 2 a.m., my mother and my grandmother head over to his house to find him up, dressed, coat on, hat on, waiting for them. "Oh, did the hospital call you already?" "No, my wife just came and saw me, told me you were on your way to take me to say goodbye to her body." Utterly true, and always gives me chills when I think about it.
In 1985, my ex-wife and I were sleeping. There was a small sliver of light coming in through the window from a streetlight, so the room and bed were dimly visible. Our black Pomeranian was at the end of the bed asleep. I dreamt that I woke up, reached down to pet him, and he turned into a glossy black bivalve/oyster thing which opened up to reveal rows of gleaming glass teeth. I woke up to my ex backpedaling up the bed over the pillows towards the wall. I asked, "What's wrong?" She said, "What is that shiny black clam thing with the teeth at the end of the bed? Where's the dog?" We had had the same nightmare at the same time. This still gives me a chill. 4 years ago, I was taking a friend's daughter, who was 13 years old, from Fort Bragg to Sacramento, about a 3.5-hour drive. We left at 12 p.m. and should be there by 4 p.m. Halfway there is Clear Lake and lots of little towns around the lake. One of them, Nice, has a Foster's Freeze. It was a hot day, so we stopped in for an ice cream. It was about 2 p.m. We got our orders and walked across the street to the park that's there, just to stretch our legs and eat our ice cream. We were there, I thought, about 15 to 20 minutes. We walked back to the car and my cell phone started ringing. I answered it. It was the girl's grandmother asking me, "Where are you with my granddaughter?" So, I looked at the clock and it was 7 p.m. I was shocked and speechless, but blurted out that we were running late, that we should be there in 2 hours. I looked at my small passenger and told her, "Hey, 5 hours have gone by." She didn't believe it either. Our ice creams hadn't even melted. We were both stunned, to say the least. I put it out that we just experienced a time lag or some kind of time something where we lost 5 hours of our lives in what seemed like 15 or 20 minutes. We both agreed that this was the weirdest thing ever and that we were both a witness to it. We also agreed that her grandmother wasn't going to believe it.
I lost a sapphire ring my dad gave me when I turned 15. 2 years later, I was washing my face in the bathroom sink and the ring fell into the bowl of the sink while I was splashing water onto my face. I was all alone and there was nothing above me that it could have fallen from.